It's 6:03 and we'll get started. I might as well just pick up from where I just discussed briefly with one of the participants. Um, Houthi missiles. It's been a few days, which has been nice to have a few days. It's been even longer since they've woken us up in the middle of the night. So that's even nicer. Most of their missiles have been in the evening. A slow stroll downstairs to the shelter. Dog is all ready every time to go. A few minutes in the shelter, and up we come. Just annoying. The biggest concern relating to the Houthi missiles is, of course, their potential impact on airlines flying. But so far, just about all the American major airlines have come back. The only airlines that have not come back are a couple of the European ones, particularly the Lufthansa group hasn't come back, which includes Swiss Air, Austrian, and I think one other airline. And Ryanair has not come back, which is the Irish airline, which is a complicated issue probably in and of itself. Low-cost airline, it's hurting a lot of Israelis because Israelis like to travel on Ryanair. They're really cheap leaving Israel. On the other hand, we've learned our lesson in our family. We don't go in and out of the country on anything but El Al. It's the only way to ensure the fact that you're going to be able to get in and out of the country. So, in any case, and by the way, if I mentioned it, LL is doing a lot better, not only because of other airlines not being there, but because a lot of Israelis making the same choice that I make. That if you're going to plan a vacation or plan a business trip, plan it on El Al because you never know what's going to happen with any of the other airlines. Are they going to be there to fly you when you need to or not to? And so El Al has gained a great deal from that, and that's a big plus. Any case, that was a side trip. The main story today has been what's been a terrible week here. Um, the fact that we lost 8 soldiers last week in two separate incidents, basically, both in one form or another IEDs. In other words, improvised explosive devices, something the U.S. Army, Marines, and everyone learned very well in Iraq. Um, not explosives put together. In our case, in most cases, it's from armaments that didn't explode in Gaza. Uh, Bombs about there's an argument of whether it's 5%, 10%, 2%, but some percentage of the bombs that are dropped do not explode. The explosive material is there, and therefore Hamas has learned how to use it. They've used it, before that, between previous wars. They've gotten the explosives that they've needed from our bombs. So who's providing armaments for the Hamas? We are, in a around this sort of way. The issue is, and it remains, and it continues, and it's why? What are we doing in Gaza right now that justifies, let's leave aside the death of the Gazans, which we shouldn't leave aside because it's a major issue and we can't ignore it. But let's put it aside for 2 seconds. The fact of the matter is, what justifies losing 8 soldiers last week? You know, right after October 7th, no one questioned the fact that it's going to cost lives to defeat Hamas, to do what we need to do in Gaza. Nothing comes, unfortunately, war doesn't come without its costs. But the question now is, what is the goal that makes it worthwhile to keep on having soldiers dying? And they will keep on dying. There's no question. As long as we're in Gaza, whether it's one a week, five a week, 10 a week, some number of soldiers are going to die from the minimal resistance that Hamas is putting up. They're not putting up any significant resistance. They're not engaging in fighting 98% of the time. The few times they engage, someone pops up from a tunnel, shoots an RPG towards Israeli troops, and goes back down into the tunnel. Sometimes that person is killed, sometimes not. But that's the only battle that's going on in Gaza right now with Hamas. Hamas's goal is to maintain its forces as best it can, and the way to maintain your forces is not to engage with Israel. Certainly, we're in this strange situation. I know it's strange, but the fact of the matter is that at the beginning of the war, we had an army that didn't have a lot of experience. It hadn't, the soldiers, especially the young soldiers, hadn't fought a war, had no idea. Um, but now these soldiers have had a year and a half, too much experience, more experience than any soldiers in Israel's history. And Hamas Their experienced soldiers are long dead. So they have young, new soldiers fighting primarily fighter terrorists, whatever you want to call them. So we're just maintaining this war so we can maintain, by all accounts, Netanyahu's government can continue because there seems to be no plan whatsoever how to end this war other than, um, accept Hamas's terms. You can end it that way. Accept the Egyptian, Qatari, whatever, their proposal, which is a joint Arab group associated with the PA, Palestinian Authority, where the Hamas will have some role, and we pull out of Gaza. But other than that, there is no plan, and certainly Netanyahu has absolutely no interest right now in pursuing a plan. He's heading into an election, whether it's going to be in 4 months or 8 months, but this is the direction the country is going in. And there's no interest whatsoever in reaching a plan to end this, and it's terrible. There's just no other way of putting it. And it's terrible because every day that goes by, the hostages remain in the tunnels. The odds of one of them or two of them or 10 of them dying, either from our fire, from the fact that Hamas gets angry and someone shoots them, or just from medical conditions that are untreated for so long, is just very high. And um, there's just no excuse. There's no excuse. There are very few people who provide an excuse. The only argument that's made is how can we leave Hamas in power after October 7th? We're just waiting for another October 7th to occur. But that's an absurd argument at this point because uh, because the reality is that October 7th is not going to happen again. I mean, I've written this more than once. There is not going to be another October 7th. There will be something else will happen. I have no doubt. Other mistakes will be made. No army is perfect. No intelligence service is perfect. We have enemies, and our enemies are not going to disappear. So something's going to happen at some point, but it's not going to happen like October 7th. It's not going to happen from Gaza for that matter. So it's just an excuse. It's a story that's being told that some people buy it, but not that many people buy it at this point. It's really hard to buy the idea that we have to remain there because we have to kill the last Hamas thing. Now we are killing them one by one. We're killing Hamas leaders. In the last 2 days, we killed the head of the not Hamas, but one of the offspring groups that had kidnapped and killed the Bibas family. We killed the head of that organization yesterday, the day before. We killed the Hamas spokesman. We killed Hamas leader up north, I believe it was. So slowly we're killing, but we're on the fifth, sixth generation of those we've killed. I mean, we did retrieve the body of Mohammed Sinwar, the brother of Ichi Sinwar, and it was a new leader, and we managed to get him. But okay, now what? We are not going to eliminate every last member of Hamas in Gaza the same way it's been 20 years and we haven't, it's more than 20 years, but let's say 20 years since 25 years since the second Intifada began. We have not eliminated every Hamas person in the West Bank in Yehuda v'Shomron. Can't be done. You can't eliminate every single one of them. It's not possible. And the army just can't do it. I mean, our politicians talk like we can keep on this endless war. But forget about the reservists who have fought way too long and have missed their families and all the problems that they come from the fact that they've served 250, 300 days in the last year and a half. Just the regular 18-year-old regular soldiers who were drafted, let's say soon before October 7th, and have spent more than a year and a half in high intensity combat. It's never happened in Israel's history. The Israeli army isn't made up for that, isn't designed for that. Most of them have been in some form of combat with, a week off, 2 weeks off, maybe 3 weeks off, but nothing more than that. Even in Europe during World War II, clearly after a number of months, soldiers was rotated off the front lines. Vietnam, it was 6 months in country and then out. Uh, bombing pilots did 20 missions and then they were sent home. I mean, I have to live through the 20 missions, but that's a different story. I'm talking World War II. But the reality is, this has been on for way, way longer than anything has ever happened in Israel. And the soldiers and the society is just not not made up for that, is not capable of dealing with that. And that's where we stand. It keeps on going and going and going with no real solution. We have the issue, we have two side things that are related. First of all, the issue of humanitarian aid. So we had this plan that if any of you were reading what I wrote, I was certainly skeptical of whether it could succeed or not. And so far, unfortunately, my skepticism has proven to be correct. Uh, it's been closed almost as much as it's been open. It hasn't succeeded. They talked about having a women's only area. That hasn't happened. Uh, we don't even know what's really going on. Even Israeli media hasn't really been allowed to go there and film what's going on in terms of distribution. The numbers were given a couple of, a number of millions of meals were given out. But a meal, remember, a meal is, maybe one meal is good for two, maybe you need 1.5 meals a day. I don't know how that's calculated, but there are 2 million people there. And since it's the start of the week has gone by, so you do the math, that really doesn't work all that well. So the system just isn't working. I mean, the argument was that too many people showed up. Well, guys, it doesn't require space, an expert in physics to know that if you set up places where you're giving away free food, and you have 2 million people, most of them, if they're not starving, they're very hungry, that you're going to have a lot of people showing up to get your free food. I mean, you need to understand that. You have to understand that from the beginning and plan accordingly. Number two, the last 2 days, the argument was made, well, Hamas has threatened our workers. Huh? Really? I mean, is that a surprise to anyone? This directly threatens Hamas. Now, if this would succeed, this would be a great thing. A, it would feed the people of Gaza, and B, it would undermine Hamas's control of these people. But for this to succeed, you need, let's put it this way, much better plans than have gone into any part of this war until now. And so the reality is it hasn't succeeded. Doesn't look like the right planning was done to make it happen. We saw that right before it began, the CEO of the company resigned because he said it wasn't going to work. And so here we are. The attempt was made. So far, it's not working, and we don't have good solutions. Let's put it that way. Um, and the terrible things did happen. It's not to this day, it's not totally clear what happened in terms of the people who were killed near the centers. Were they killed by the IDF? Were they killed by Hamas? Probably a mixture of both. That's probably what happened. But again, as I've written, um, the IDF spokesman's office has done a terrible job, certainly since the spokesman has been changed, even for the Israeli people. There's like no hasbara going on from the army to the people, leaving aside to the outside the country. But to the people in the country itself, very limited communications, very limited understanding of what's going on. The military correspondents have their own connections and they do their best to explain what's going on or try to explain what's going on. But it creates a situation where people feel like they don't know what's going on, they don't understand it. And of course, often it's their children or their wife, husbands who are fighting that war at the moment, and they feel that they should know better what's going on, and it's just not. It's just like everything else that's been going on, a reasonably big mess. The last thing, of course, is the issue of the militias that we're supporting, or that we're supporting alternative militias in Gaza, because, as we all know, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. And so the enemy of Hamas must be our friend. Um, you know, where did Hamas come from? Because we wanted someone to be an enemy of the Palestinian Authority. So we supported the creation of Hamas to be a balance to the Palestinian Authority. This goes back to the 1980s. So, you know, we haven't learned from history. And we continue not to learn from history. It sounds good. It's a very nice idea, but it just doesn't work. On top of which, the most interesting part of it is all of this is over the past, I guess it's since the beginning of the war, there have been various plans put forward, including the plan put forward by Defense Minister Gallant about 3 months into the war, 4 months into the war, for plan for Gaza for the day after. He said back then that we need a plan for the day after, otherwise everything we're doing is a waste of time. And his plan, he said, look, we have we have bad choices. Worst choice is that we occupy all of Gaza and have a military government. Leaving aside the ideology or the politics of it, we just don't have the troops to do it. It's an absurd idea because we just don't have the troops in order to occupy the whole Gaza Strip and provide military, a civilian administration by the military. We don't have the capability of doing it at the moment. But leave that part aside. And I think it's a terrible idea politically and morally, but we'll leave that, put it aside. Plan B, leave Hamas in power. Not a great idea. The plan that he suggested was some plan that involved the Palestinian Authority. The Palestinian Authority are not no lovers of Zion. They're not Zionists. We know that. However, we've managed to have it work security-wise with the Palestinian Authority for 20 years. It's had its ups and downs. And yes, the Palestinian Authority wishes we weren't there. Well, guess what? We probably wish the Palestinians weren't there too. So, but we both recognize the fact that we're both here to stay, or at least for whatever period of time to the future, and we've been able to work with the Palestinian Authority. But for Netanyahu, the Palestinian Authority is a third rail. He can't touch it because of all the things they said against the Palestinian Authority, certainly Smotrich and Ben-Gvir, and the other things that Likud has been saying about the Palestinian Authority over the last couple of years. So he can't touch the Palestinian Authority. But guess what? The head of the militia, who we are supporting, who in some form or another is a drug runner, we're not exactly sure, was interviewed this morning by Doron Kadosh, who's the military correspondent for Galay Tzal, for the Army radio station. And he interviewed him, and he had an interesting interview. And one of the things he asked him is, who's supporting you? And he said, I get my support and orders from the Palestinian Authority. I get my legitimacy. I'm representing the Palestinian Authority and the things I'm doing. So here, after all this time, going all around, wasting all this time, losing so many soldiers, we're back to the point where it's the Palestinian Authority who are effectively supporting in Gaza right now, or a militia of the Palestinian Authority. It's absurd. Again, I'm not against the Palestinian Authority. I just think, we should have done that many, many months ago. And of course, who's who's providing the funds for both the humanitarian aid and for this group of people who are supporting one another is a secret. No one knows. It's being kept from the people. It's being cut from most of the government. It's being done in secret. And even the fact that we're supporting them is being done to a very large extent in secret. So secrets are never good, let's put it that way. And it's part of the mess. It's part of the mess. And it's not at all clear, tomorrow morning you made me the king of the king of the IDF in Gaza. I'm not sure how we'd extricate ourselves very well. It's a difficult situation right now, and it's not getting any better. A few other topics, domestic politics first and foremost, because that's what's the main topic in Israel right now is the issue, are we going to go to elections? Are we not going to elections? As of right now, and I say this very carefully, there will be a vote on Wednesday, the first vote for calling for the dissolution of the Knesset. And then it's a question of how long it'll be until the Knesset actually dissolves, because it has to pass three more readings of the Knesset. It has to go through a committee. The Likud controls the committee. They could delay it. They could go back and forth. There's 6 weeks left to this term of the Knesset, and then they go on vacation for 3 months. We have a Knesset that takes long, long vacations. So this is a particularly long vacation because they don't come back until after the Chagim. So they go on vacation in 6 weeks, and they're on vacation until mid-October, I guess this is after the Chagim. So the question becomes, will they vote to dissolve the Knesset before they go on vacation or not? Netanyahu will do all he can to delay it. Talk about some sort of deal, progress with the deal. This is all about the question of the ultra-Orthodox draft. There was talk that Yuli Edelstein, who's been the person on the Defense and Foreign Affairs Committee that has blocked Netanyahu's effort to reach a deal, has agreed to a deal that basically says we'll exempt all the yeshiva students who are studying in yeshiva. In return, the rabbis have to insist that all the ultra-Orthodox young people who are not in yeshiva go into the army. And there's an expectation that there's at least 16 to 20,000 of those people. So 16 to 20,000 additional people in the army would make a big difference. However, the rabbis rejected that so far because they object to the whole question. It's not only about they want to save the yeshiva students, they do not want their young men to go into the army because to the army, to them, is muksa. It's something that, it's unholy. They'll get, well, regardless of what other units are created, etc., they'll see the outside world in one way or another. I mean, I know of cases where the actually ultra-Orthodox have served in some of the intelligence units, etc., in computers and places like that. And yes, of course, they can maintain their lifestyle because they only work 9 to 5 or something like that. But they meet other people. I mean, one of the, uh, and I'm not talking about meeting women, put that part aside. It's an all male unit, etc. But there will not be a situation in the army where they're not going to meet other people. I will make you a bet that other than an occasional, if they've traveled to somewheres and they've talked to someone on an airplane by accident or whatever, most young ultra-Orthodox young men have never had a conversation with non-Orthodox, non-ultra-Orthodox people. Some of the ones who are working may, have people come into their store or whatever, but generally speaking, it's an incredibly insular community. That's the idea of their community. Build a wall between them and the rest of the society. After all, keep in mind the fact that the Haskalah, the Enlightenment that came to Europe, basically took 50 to 60% of the ultra-Orthodox European community and turned them or secular or to emigrate. And that's what happened when they met modernity. And the whole idea of the ultra-Orthodox communities here in Israel is to create a wall between them and modernity. And the army, whatever it talks about maintaining their lifestyle and everything else, represents modernity. And the rabbis do not want their students to have anything to do with modernity. That's the way they maintain control. Now, I want to mention another factor. Today's rabbis are a new generation. They're not young anymore, the guys in their 80s and 70s, but they're not the generation of the Bavitcher Rebbe and a group of other former rabbis who had a secular education. The Bavitcher Rebbe went to the Sorbonne and had a degree, I think it was physics, if I'm not mistaken. Others had degrees in other areas. These current generations have known nothing but the yeshiva world their whole lives. They don't know anything else. So there's 70 and 80-year-old men who know nothing but the yeshiva world, have no outside involvement whatsoever, and they're making decisions for the ultra-Orthodox community. And that's what makes things particularly problematic and difficult. So we'll see. I truly don't know. I think Prime Minister Netanyahu is a terrible prime minister, but he's a marvelous politician. And so he's managed to maintain his power for all these years because he is such a great politician. So I would not write him off, certainly not yet. So we'll have to see. We'll see in the coming weeks whether he manages to delay elections or not. By all accounts, he will lose the next election. I wouldn't just be sure of that also, obviously, because like I said, he's a great politician. But it's really, look, it's hard for me to see how he's running again. I mean, any other situation, a person will forget the fact that he's on trial for corruption. That trial will end another 10 years. I mean, probably before it's finally over. And I'm not exaggerating a lot in terms of the final appeal process could take that many years. But leave that part aside. Person who was responsible for October 7th and was responsible for the longest war in our history should even think to run again. It's an absurd situation, but he's going to run again, and their supporters, people that support him. He has a following, and I don't call it a cult, but it's a following of people who thinks he can do no wrong. They're people who don't know Israel without him being prime minister, basically. He's some sort of father figure to some of them. And, you don't um, you don't walk away from your father, so to speak, even if he beats you. So uh, that's where we stand with that. I want to quickly touch on two other quick subjects. Lebanon. Um, we've been rather aggressive in Lebanon. Um, and the question is that a good policy or or is it a bad policy? The negatives, it might be delaying a, a peace agreement with Lebanon if it's possible, but I'm not sure. We've clearly managed to keep on hitting Hezbollah in any situation where they violate the ceasefire. The agreement allows us to do that if the Lebanese don't do it themselves, which they mostly have not done. A few times they have, and been successful. Now, I know when we attacked them the other night in Beirut, all expectation was Hezbollah would be forced to respond, but they didn't respond because they're not really capable of responding at this point. Or they understand that if they respond, the counter response will be so strong that it's not worth their while to do so. They're not getting arms because of Syria, because it's a government that opposes them in Syria and opposes Iran in Syria. And so Syria, the change in Syria has made Hezbollah's position in Lebanon very, very problematic to say the least. And I'm hoping one of these days we'll have diplomats who will know how to make use of that situation. Which brings me lastly to Syria. There is talk that we're doing some talking with the Syrians. Uh, I think the most important thing we could be doing is developing a strategic relationship with the new Syrian government. We should have been doing that from the beginning instead of bombing armaments, etc. We should have been working on a strategic outreach. Hopefully, we're doing it now. I think a deal could be reached. Obviously, the current government is not obsessed with the Golan Heights in the same way that the Assad family was, as the family that lost the Golan in one form or another. I think a deal could be made with the Syrians where we, lease the Golan Heights for 200 years or something crazy like that. And so we don't have to leave the Golan Heights. We can reach a peace agreement with the Syrian people, the Syrian government. I think it's a doable thing. And strategically, it would make a tremendous difference in terms of our strategic situation. When then we would increase the chances of getting to a peace deal with Lebanon. I'd love for us to extend the train that used to run to Damascus and, dream, probably not in my lifetime, but the high-speed rail to Europe from Israel as opposed to having to fly in and out of the country. Anyway, that's just a dream. I have no dream of eating hummus in Damascus. The hummus is good enough in Tel Aviv that I don't need to go to Damascus for hummus. Um, anyway, okay, we're at the halfway point. At this point, I'll go for questions. Please raise your hand. My wife's not home at the moment, so she's not going to see you. So I'm going to have to look and hopefully I'll see you. So,
I don't find the rising hand button in the moment.
okay,
Sorry
well,
for
speak
that.
up. That's fine.
Thank you. What's the situation about in Syria with Druze?
The Druze.
Yeah.
So the Druze situation in Syria has to be divided into two parts. The Druze along the border and the Druze a little further in along the Damascus suburbs. Along the border, our troops are there basically. In most areas that the Druze are there, we're working together with them. There's cooperation. Remember that the Druze are a significant portion or an important portion of the Israeli army. So we really do work closely with the Druze, and that relationship is good. I think our warnings seem to have helped in terms of attacking the Druze in the areas near Damascus. What was going on seems to have stopped. Um, Again, it's also a question of Giuliani, what his goals are. Is he trying to really create a secular state of Syria? We don't know. It's a gamble. I think it's a gamble worth taking because uh, if it works, it's great. If it doesn't work, okay, well, we're back to where we were. We're no worse off if that happens. Um, so um, we'll see. But so far, so good at the moment. Let's put it that way. We'll have to see. Brian,
Hi, yeah. I live in the UK, so uh, and the UK government has been quite highly critical of Israel recently, but at the same time, David Lammy, the Foreign Secretary, um, and I've heard him say this on other platforms as well when he was interviewed one of the strong news programs that Hamas cannot be left in Gaza. And my question is, and I know earlier you were saying about how it's not possible to get rid of Hamas, but have you heard anything, any realistic prospect from any source when politicians like David Lammy and others, and I've heard others talk of this, of the necessity of getting rid of Hamas out of Gaza and out of power and no arms, how that might be achieved? Because I've heard it said quite glibly at times, but never heard anything that suggests how it might be achieved. Now, I don't expect you to have the solution, um, but have you heard anything that you think has any credibility whatsoever in that respect?
Okay,
Or
so
should we just
look, yeah, look, there
say,
were a couple of plans there that existed. There's the actually the Egyptian plan or the Saudi plan, which basically calls for a joint Arab force of some kind or another, together with the Palestinian Authority and some technocratic government in Gaza that might include the Hamas as part. Now, I think that's about as far as we could go. It would not leave Hamas in power as the government of Gaza. I don't think we can totally get rid of them. The question is, do we end up with a Hezbollah-like situation in Lebanon, where Hezbollah, prior to this war, was not in power, but they were controlling the government? I don't know. Depends on how committed the Saudis, the Egyptians, and others are. None of them like Hamas. Hamas is disliked by almost everybody, with the exception of Qatar. So I, I see it being possible, but all these countries would need the PA's involvement because the PA is recognized as the only legitimate representative of the Palestinian people. However you want to define that, good, bad, or indifferent, that is what the United Nations has decided, what Arab nations have all decided. You can love them or hate them, but that's who's recognized. And so, therefore, if we want some sort of deal, it'll have to have some part, the PA will have to have some part, in my opinion, in that deal. You can limit it, you can talk about a reconstituted PA, you can talk about a lot of things, but they will have to have a part. That is the only way of doing it, I think. Um, so we'll have to see. Look, I have to say I was not expecting, great love from the current government of Great Britain. I was a little over 2 years ago. I was at it was less than 2 years ago, but it was in March of after the war began. I happened to be in London and stumbled into the House of Commons when there was a debate about Gaza. And that was when the conservatives were in power, and watching the Labor attacking the conservatives supporting Israel one after another, I said to a British friend of mine, I hope Labor doesn't come to power from the Israeli standpoint. I'm leaving aside British politics, which I'm not an expert on, but they're in power now. They're certainly critical, but then I'm critical. So I have no problem with being somewhat critical of where we stand. So there is a plan, there is a way, but it's going to require the two letters, PA, Palestinian Authority, to have some part of this. And you can't ignore it. And we're trying to ignore it because we don't like the PA. But the PA is not our friend, but they're not our enemy either. And we need to keep that in mind.
thank
Ian.
you.
Mark, maybe a question in disguised as an observation. It's no great surprise that there's no day after plan for Gaza, because that day after plan cannot exist in isolation from a complete plan for some kind of settlement or objective or principles with the Palestinians in general. And in the lack of any strategy, long-term policy, long-term objective, what Israel looks like, what the borders look like, you cannot decide on the day after plan for Gaza either.
I don't necessarily agree with you on that because, look, in my opinion, personal opinion, the long-term solution to the Palestinian problem is going to be a two-state solution. However, support for a two-state solution in Israel stands at about 15% at this point. It was over 50% at the time of Oslo. It's down to about 15% and dropping, and I'm not even a supporter of it at the moment because the concept of after October 7th of creating an independent Palestinian state is something that most Israelis just won't accept at the moment. And it's hard to see how you get there. On top of which, um, look, the reason there's no independent Palestinian state, quite honestly, is because of Hamas. I'm not talking about October 7th. I'm talking about the fact that starting at the time of Oslo, Hamas had concentrated bombing campaign that undermined any peace effort, undermined support for a peace effort inside of Israel. Israeli actions to react to the bombing campaigns resulted in losing interest amongst the Palestinians for a two-state solution. And a terrible, terrible situation existed, and they succeeded. You look at the two events, the two terrible events that ensured the fact that there's no peace between us and the Palestinians. One was the assassination of Yitzhak Rabin. Two was Hamas and all the things that Hamas has done. So how do you get a plan that I just don't see us having a long-term plan. I think we need a medium-term plan. A medium-term plan says the following, in my opinion. The Palestinians are not going anywhere. They will be our neighbors regardless of whether we like it or not. They're here to stay. We need to find the way to improve our relations with the Palestinians, giving them as much internal autonomy as possible, decreasing their interaction with us as much as possible, while maintaining our overall security control to make sure that armaments, rockets, etc., don't get built, don't get smuggled in, etc. We need some combination. What we haven't had, and people say, I'm naive, that we haven't done positive things, right? We've done very few positive things to improve our relations with the Palestinians, other than allowing some X number of them to work in this country, which is within our interest, right? They were builders for us. I mean, they did well. They made a lot of money working in industry and jobs that Israelis didn't want. But we did very little to say, what can we do to make the Palestinian lives better? Has there been anyone in the Israeli government ever to have that position? Just a minor position. Do we make sure they have enough water in their villages? I've always had this stupid plan. It's really very small and very stupid, but it's a small, stupid plan. Like, for instance, the Palestinian children on the West Bank, most of them have never seen a beach. Why can't we take, I don't know, a kilometer or half a kilometer, whatever, of our beach along the Mediterranean? It's long enough. Fence it off, create a zone, call it a Palestinian beach, totally surround it, and during the summer, run buses from there, from the West Bank to the beach. No stops in between, military escort, everything that's involved. So Palestinian kids get to come to the beach. Now, is that going to make peace? Is that going to make them love us? Of course not. But these are the small sort of things you do to try to change trajectory. Look, we learned it doesn't always work, right? The same people who were the wonderful people on the kibbutzim along the Otef, along Gaza border, who used to pick up Palestinians and drive them to the hospitals and spend time and effort, and were trying to do what I'm just talking about, were murdered in their beds, were beheaded, were all those things by Gazans. So I'm not naive. I don't think it's going to make peace. It's not going to make things better tomorrow. But if we have a long-term plan that includes various aspects of it and limits the amount of negative interactions we have, and we say, realistically, there's going to be no Palestinian state next year and not the year after, but maybe we'll say 20 years, maybe it'll end up happening in 10 years, but in 20 years there can be a Palestinian state if X, Y, and Z happens. That could be a plan. That might work. But who's going to plan for 20 years in this country? My goodness, we can't even plan for 6 months. I mean, 20-year plans. One of the reasons I do what I do in life, when I first made Aliyah in 1975, I'd studied urban studies at Columbia, and I wanted to be an urban planner. I wanted to help design new cities in Israel. I had done a lot of work on Israel's development towns. While I was in the army, the Likud came to power, and they had cutbacks. What was the first thing they cut back? The 50 people who were in charge of long-term planning in Israel. The long-term planners were let go. One of the first things the Likud did. It reminds me of Dodge. I don't think they really thought it out too carefully. But we don't need long-term. Who needs those people? We can save some money by getting rid of the long-term planners. Well, anyone who's interested in urban planning, etc., understands the fact that in a country that has no long-term planners, it's going to be very hard to make much progress in terms of development towns and things that I was hoping to do. So that's a long non-answer to your question, but that's how I feel about these things.
Mark, one further observation, if you don't mind.
Sure, go ahead.
You have to hope for a two-state solution, because in the absence of that, it's either a forever war or a binational state and the end of the Jewish state.
Well, I agree. I'm in favor of a two-state solution, but I understand it's not going to happen anytime soon. So my view, why am I against various settlements that are being done in various places? And leaving aside the fact they're a military disaster, right? In other words, every time we put a settlement in the middle of the West Bank somewhere, it means 6, 10, 20, I don't know, some number of Israeli soldiers have to go there to guard it. And we don't have those soldiers to guard these things in the middle of nowhere. But leave that part aside. For the exact opposite reason to people who are starting the settlements. They want to eliminate the possibility there could ever be a Palestinian state. I want to maintain the possibility that in the future we can have a Palestinian state. I understand we're not going to have one anytime soon. And I'm not recommending it. Even Yair Golan, who I think is the best Israeli politician at the moment, not as a politician, but is the person who speaks the most truth of any Israeli politician at the moment, he's not calling for a Palestinian state anytime soon because it's not realistic. However, we need to leave the possibility of a future Palestinian state because it is the only solution. There is no other solution, unless we all become, peace amongst everybody and we don't care about nationality or religion. And obviously, the world has gone the opposite way in the last 20 years and not in the ways that we don't care about things like that. Laura.
Thank you for doing this. Is there a sense that Netanyahu doesn't want to make a deal to get the other hostages out because that would reduce Israeli public willingness to prolong the war in Gaza? And then, semi-related, are the reports about the Trump administration's frustration with Netanyahu and Dermer having any impact on their reputation inside Israel for being such good players in Washington?
Okay, so let's start with the last one. Yes, clearly there's jokes made at this point about the wonderful relationship, and his last election, maybe not the last one, the one before the last one, was pictures of him with Putin and with Trump, and there's only one like him, so to speak. So that clearly people understand is not the case, and it's quite people talk about the fact that, and this is what I believe. I believe that Netanyahu is living in 80s America. He claims to understand America, but I don't think he understands America at all. He understands America during the time he was at MIT, during the time he was ambassador to the United Nations, or what was also the Economic Council in Washington, and somebody who's deputy ambassador for a while. That's the America he understands. He does not understand America of today, which surprised me because he's a smart person and he reads, but he does not understand America of today. And Israelis beginning to understand that fact, without a doubt. And of course, Israelis are also, not in love with President Trump in the way they used to be. Let's put it that way. As to the hostage, look, I think the way you stated it's a little bit backwards. He does not want to do a hostage deal that will result in ending the war. In other words, any way to get back all the hostages will result in ending the war. He does not want to end the war because Smotrich and Ben Gvir will leave his government. If he does, his government falls. Now, the big question now, and a lot of Israelis are asking this question, is what happens if we're actually going to elections? In other words, what happens during the 4 to 6 months or 3 months, however many months it'll be? The maximum, I believe, is 5 months by law, but you can somehow extend it if holidays fall, whatever. But what happens during the period of time after the Knesset is disbanded? What happens then? What is Netanyahu's strategy at that point? In other words, he no longer has to worry about losing his government because the government is already over. He's in a transitional government. And during a transitional government, basically, there's certain limited things they can and cannot do. And people, it's too late for them to bring down the government. The government can't fall once it's a transitional government. So what happens then? And that's the big question. What is he going to run on? Is he going to want to end the war and bring back the hostages and run on the fact that he got back all the hostages? Or is he going to want to keep up the war and say, I'm fighting until the last, total victory? Nitzachon muchlat, and is that what he's going to run on? And all these other people, be they Gantz, Bennett, whoever will end the war before we have total victory. I don't have that answer. He'll have to poll on that. And I'm not really sure how that, he'll decide based on his polling what his position is going to be. So we'll have to see. Because, there's no way to end, there's no way to have a hostage. He will take the hostage deal that'll bring back some of the hostages. In other words, the deal that was on the table, the Witkoff plan, 10 hostages for a 60-day ceasefire. He'll go with that. He made a very clear statement. He said, we'll take some hostages along the way. I mean, it was the stupidest statement to make. If you really wanted to make a deal, you wouldn't make a statement like that. He made a statement that basically told Hamas, well, along the way, we'll take the hostages, but then we're going to go back and fight and kill you. I mean, you at least want to leave some possibility that they might believe that this will be the end of the war. Even if you have no plans to bring it to the end of the war, at least make believe that. I mean, you lie about so many things. Why is this the one thing in the world you can't lie about? But
Well,
that seems
especially
to be.
when you have, as your reports make clear, that you have soldiers getting killed in Gaza now who've been already on four tours in Gaza in a year and a half. And and then he's trying to fight to keep more people from being recruited into the army, right? So you have the burden being placed on fewer people. It seems so cynical.
More than cynical, it's impossible. It's an
Yeah.
impossible situation because, I mean, looking at it on two different levels. Just on a day-to-day level, he spent the last week worrying about making a deal relating the ultra-Orthodox leaving getting the exemptions. That's what he's been working on the last week and a half, besides being on trial and spending 2 days a week on his trial. The most absurd thing in the earth when the Supreme Court said he could both be on trial and be prime minister, but we'll leave that part aside. So he spent that and he's doing that. He's not spent the time worrying about what's going on in Gaza, what we're doing. He's not spent the time worrying about the international aid organization that Israel is sort of supporting. He has a defense minister that he knows is incompetent. I mean, that's the absurd thing. It's not like he has a defense minister that he has confidence. He has confidence in his political ability that he's loyal to him, but everyone knows that the defense minister is not exactly the most competent defense minister Israel's ever had. So the only person who could be a defense minister is Netanyahu, whether you like him or not. He's not an incompetent person. But no, he's busy dealing with the ultra-Orthodox draft. At the same time, like you said, soldiers are dying. There aren't enough soldiers. Listen, it really is a real problem. None of we have 5 ugdot supposedly in Gaza. That's we talked about the number of people the number of army units, but they're I forgot the equivalent of underfunded. They don't have the number of soldiers they normally do. They're not full ugdot. Every unit has less people than it's supposed to have, and the Ugda itself doesn't have all the parts that it normally has because there just aren't those people available anymore. It doesn't exist. And it's very nice, but this country was not designed, the army was not designed for a war that's 610 plus days going. It just isn't. There's a limit. There's a limit to how, living inside the economy, and so far the economy seems to be humming along, but underneath the surface, not so well. But it just isn't. The army is not set for that. It can't. And I just don't know. Very cynical is the understatement. Staying in power is the one thing that's really the most important thing at this point. And that's without, we haven't discussed it all. The whole issue of the Gazans who are dying. And quite honestly, my own view was at the beginning of the war, collateral damage is something you have in war. And if you're going to kill Yechiel Sinwar, um, then, I understand when you kill Yechiel Sinwar and the equivalent, that a lot of civilians may have to die if they're hiding amongst the civilians. There's every legal and moral reason, not moral reason, but moral understanding why that has to happen. But today, when the goals are unclear, when you're trying to kill the third or fourth commander of the 5th Brigade, who's, that is it morally okay to end up killing 5 or 10 civilians while you're killing this one guy? I have real problems with that. I really do. Um, I understand, we're better than the Americans in Iraq. Well, maybe from a statistic standpoint, but we can't claim to be the most moral army in the world, which we're clearly not, and yet say, well, statistically, we're better than the Americans were in Iraq or Afghanistan. First of all, in Iraq and Afghanistan, there weren't cameras recording everything. Certainly not in Afghanistan when we bombed villages and who knows how many people we killed in Afghanistan. But there weren't cameras. And number two, we just shouldn't be doing it. There's a limit. When you have to military target, absolutely. If we used to the immediate family of a high value military family, military target, if he's staying in his home like an idiot as opposed to in his tunnels, I guess it's okay. But at this point, with no clear goals, I think we have a moral problem there too. Listen, we're not engaged in genocide. Um, I don't know. I'm not a legal expert to know whether we've been engaging in any war crimes. Probably in the strictest definition, probably not. But morally, there's what's morally right and there's what's criminal. And what we're doing is probably not criminal, but it's probably not morally right at this point. Anyway, anyone else? Okay, everybody. I thank you. Please, any feedback from the podcast. We'll have some interesting guests this week and next week. Um, and I thank you for participating. This will end one of these weeks. I don't know when. I truly don't know when. I'm not optimistic of when this war will come to an end, but it will come to an end. We just can't keep on going forever. So thank you, everyone. Have a good 2 weeks, and see you in 2 weeks. Thank you.
Thank you.
You, Mark.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.